The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 13. Reason and Religion. The deepest heart, the inmost essence of religion, apart from its outward machinery of creed, cult, ceremony, and symbol, is the search for God and the finding of God. Its aspiration is to discover the infinite, the absolute, the one, the divine, who is all these things, and yet no abstraction, but a being. Its work is a sincere living out of the true and intimate relations between man and God. Relations of unity, relations of difference, relations of an illuminated knowledge, an ecstatic love and delight, an absolute surrender and service, a casting of every part of our existence out of its normal status into an uprush of man towards the divine, and a descent of the divine into man. All this has nothing to do with the realm of reason or its normal activities, its aim, its sphere, its process is supra-rational. The knowledge of God is not to be gained by weighing the feeble arguments of reason for or against his existence. It is to be gained only by a self-transcending and absolute consecration, aspiration, and experience. Nor does that experience proceed by anything like rational scientific experiment or rational philosophic thinking. Even in those parts of religious discipline which seem most to resemble scientific experiment, the method is a verification of things which exceed the reason and its timid scope. Even in those parts of religious knowledge which seem most to resemble intellectual operations, the illuminating faculties are not imagination, logic, and rational judgment, but revelations, inspirations, intuitions, intuitive discernments that leap down to us from a plane of supra-rational light. The love of God is an infinite and absolute feeling which does not admit of any rational limitation and does not use a language of rational worship and adoration. The delight in God is that peace and bliss which passes all understanding. The surrender to God is the surrender of the whole being to a supra-rational light, will, power, and love, and his service takes no account of the compromises with life, which the practical reason of man uses as the best part of its method in the ordinary conduct of mundane existence. Wherever religion really finds itself, wherever it opens itself to its own spirit, there is plenty of that sort of religious practice which is halting, imperfect, half sincere, only half sure of itself, and in which reason can get in a word. Its way is absolute, and its fruits are ineffable. Reason has, indeed, a part to play in relation to this highest field of our religious being and experience. But that part is quite secondary and subordinate. It cannot lay down the law for the religious life. It cannot determine in its own right the system of divine knowledge. It cannot school and lessen the divine love and delight. It cannot set bounds to spiritual experience or lay its yoke upon the action of the spiritual man. Its sole legitimate sphere is to explain, as best it can, in its own language, and to the rational and intellectual parts of man, the truths, the experiences, the laws of our super-rational and spiritual existence. That has been the work of spiritual philosophy in the East, and much more crudely and imperfectly done of theology in the West. A work of great importance at moments like the present, when the intellect of mankind, after a long wandering, is again turning towards the search for the divine. Here there must inevitably enter a part of those operations proper to the intellect, logical reasoning, inferences from the data given by rational experience, analogies drawn from our knowledge of the apparent facts of existence, appeals even to the physical truths of science, all the apparatus of the intelligent mind in its ordinary workings. But this is the weakest part of spiritual philosophy. It convinces the rational mind only where the intellect is already predisposed to belief. And even if it convinces, it cannot give the true knowledge. Reason is safest when it is content to take the profound truths and experiences of the spiritual being and the spiritual life, just as they are given to it, and throw them into such form, order, and language as will make them the most intelligible, or the least unintelligible to the reasoning mind. Even then, it is not quite safe, for it is apt to harden the order into an intellectual system and to present the form as if it were the essence. And, at best, it has to use a language which is not the very tongue of the suprarational truth, but its inadequate translation. And, since it is not the ordinary tongue either of the rational intelligence, it is open to non-understanding or misunderstanding by the ordinary reason of mankind. It is well known to the experience of the spiritual seeker that even the highest philosophizing cannot give a true inner knowledge. It is not the spiritual light, does not open the gates of experience. All it can do is to address the consciousness of man through his intellect, and, when it has done, to say, quote, "I have tried to give you the truth in a form and system which will make it intelligible and possible to you. If you are intellectually convinced or attracted, you can now seek the real knowledge, but you must seek it by other means, which are beyond my province." End quotes. But there is another level of the religious life in which reason might seem justified in interfering more independently and entitled to assume a superior role. For as there is the suprarational life in which religious aspiration finds entirely what it seeks, so too there is also the infrarational life of the instincts, impulses, sensations, crude emotions, vital activities from which all human aspiration takes its beginning. These too feel the touch of the religious sense in man, share its needs and experience, desire its satisfactions. Religion includes this satisfaction also in its scope, and in what is usually called religion, it seems even to be the greater part. Sometimes, to an external view, almost the whole. For the supreme purity of spiritual experience does not appear, or is glimpsed only through this mixed and turbid current. Much impurity, ignorance, superstition, many doubtful elements must form as the result of this contact and union of our highest tendencies with our lower ignorant nature. Here it would seem that reason has its legitimate part. Here surely it can intervene to enlighten, purify, rationalize the play of the instincts and impulses. It would seem that a religious reformation, a movement to substitute a pure, in quotes, and rational religion for one that is largely infrarational and impure, would be a distinct advance in the religious development of humanity. To a certain extent, this may be, but owing to the peculiar nature of the religious being, its entire urge towards the suprarational, not without serious qualifications, nor can the rational mind do anything here that is of a high positive value. Religious forms and systems become effete and corrupt and have to be destroyed, or they lose much of their inner sense and become clouded in knowledge and injurious in practice. And in destroying what is effete, or in negating aberrations, reason has played an important part in religious history. But in its endeavor to get rid of the superstition and ignorance which have attached themselves to religious forms and symbols, intellectual reason, unenlightened by spiritual knowledge, tends to deny and, so far as it can, to destroy the truth and the experience which was contained in them. Reformations which give too much to reason and are too negative and Protestant usually create religions which lack in wealth of spirituality and fullness of religious emotion. They are not opulent in their contents. Their form, and too often their spirit, is impoverished, bare, and cold. Nor are they really rational. For they live not by their reasoning and dogma, which to the rational mind is as irrational as that of the creeds they replace, still less by their negations, but by their positive quantum of faith and fervor, which is suprarational in its whole aim, and has, too, its infrarational elements. If these seem less gross to the ordinary mind than those of less self-questioning creeds, it is often because they are more timid in venturing into the realm of suprarational experience. The life of the instincts and impulses, on its religious side, cannot be satisfyingly purified by reason, but rather by being sublimated, by being lifted up into the illuminations of the Spirit. The natural line of religious development proceeds always by illumination, and religious reformation acts best when either it re-illuminates rather than destroys old forms, or, where destruction is necessary, replaces them by richer and not by poorer forms. And in any case, when it purifies by suprarational illumination, not by rational enlightenment. A purely rational religion could only be a cold and bare deism, and such attempts have always failed to achieve vitality and permanence, for they act contrary to the Dharma, the natural law and spirit of religion. If reason is to play any decisive part, it must be an intuitive rather than an intellectual reason, touched always by spiritual intensity and insight. For it must be remembered that the infrarational also has behind it a secret truth, which does not fall within the domain of the reason, and is not wholly amenable to its judgments. The heart has its knowledge, the life has its intuitive spirit within it, its intimations, divinations, outbreaks and upflamings of a secret energy, a divine or at least semi-divine aspiration, and outreaching, which the eye of intuition alone can fathom, and only intuitive speech or symbol can shape or utter. To root out these things from religion, or to purge religion of any elements necessary for its completeness, because the forms are defective or obscure, without having the power to illuminate them from within, or the patience to wait for their illumination from above, or without replacing them by more luminous symbols, is not to purify, but to pauperize. But the relations of the Spirit and the reason need not be, as they too often are in our practice, hostile or without any point of contact. Religion itself need not adopt for its principle the formula, in quotes, "I believe because it is impossible," end quotes, or Pascal's, quotes, "I believe because it is absurd," end quotes. What is impossible or absurd to the unaided reason becomes real and right to the reason lifted beyond itself by the power of the Spirit and irradiated by its light. for then it is dominated by the intuitive mind, which is our means of passage to a yet higher principle of knowledge. The widest spirituality does not exclude or discourage any essential human activity or faculty, but works rather to lift all of them up out of their imperfection and groping ignorance, transforms them by its touch, and makes them the instruments of the light, power, and joy of the divine being and the divine nature.